as we continue on our pathway through the parables, trying to figure out how to make sense of this. Remember that what we're looking for, Jesus called the kingdom of God, something that was different than what it is that's in front of us, something that told a different story, shared something different in our perspective. And this week specifically, where last week we were looking at hidden things, this week what we're going to look at is what is it that lies in a perception that's beyond the right now. Okay, not that they're hidden, it's just you have to recognize it. Oops, let me get up to the beginning of this. And so the difficulty of believing in the kingdom of God is that it doesn't look like the precious gift our belief says it is. And we have to choose to accept the promise, not the present moment. So right now tells us one thing, but this promise tells us something different. And we have to decide how to move from this present moment, whatever it is that's true here, and towards that. And maybe this part is the important thing. That doesn't always look like the precious gift, or it's at least difficult to see how you can do that. So think of it this way. How many at some point or another decided to buy a house when you really didn't have the money to buy a house? And you had to know it was worth the investment and the struggle and the sacrifice it would take to be able to have that house. That's kind of the type of investment you have to make to step into that vision of what can be. You have to see longer term than what is easy to see. So what stands in your way of doing that? What makes it so that you see right now, not further down the line? What are your barriers? And you can think just very presently, it could be something like coronavirus. Coronavirus blocks all of our visions. But what else does?
But just uncertainty.
Uncertainty, that's right. Right, if I'm buying a house, I'm looking at, well, when we bought our first house, Joni and I did, she was in school still. She was going to graduate someday, but we had one income, and not that she didn't work, but a lot of that was going towards her education. And so you're right, it's the uncertainty of, can we afford this? What else?
I said uncertainty.
Uncertainty, that's right.
Yeah. Again, I think I said something about this last week, but fear, just all those the voices in your head, all this, that just kind of stop you from moving forward with what you would be good, but there's things holding you back in your own head.
Yep. The single biggest phrase, the single most repeated phrase by Jesus was some form of do not fear. And there's a reason for that, because that fear, even though fear has a place in our lives, the way it takes over our lives is huge. And we have to choose against it on a regular basis, because it tells us one story that isn't the whole story. What else stands in your way right now? Why don't you see the bigger picture?
Well, I think sometimes, can you hear me?
We can. You're just soft.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Sometimes I get so focused on what's happening in my present life that I can't see that this is just a small part of the whole life. So I guess it's perspective.
Yeah.
That you start seeing something as overwhelming, and you can't remember that it's only a small part.
Yeah. The good news for the rest of us is none of the rest of us have that dysfunction, Doris.
Oh, good. Well, I'll come to you when I need something.
Present stories always tell us one thing, don't they? And we lose that larger perspective. Another helpful way to be able to look at the parables we're going to look at today is think about your children. If you think about them just the way they're acting in this moment, just the way they are as a 2-year-old or a 12-year-old or whatever, then you're going to miss the real story about that kid. And these parables are all about saying, can you see the larger story? Not just the present moment. Okay? So let's jump into the parables. The first one is called the parable of the mustard seed. And it goes like this. The kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Now, I don't know much about mustard. I don't even put it on hamburgers. I like ketchup better. But I think this is a very important thing. From a very small seed, from a very small something, things will grow. Think about a watermelon seed. The seed itself isn't very large, but the fruit that comes from it is. How easy is it, though, to evaluate life from the smallness of right now instead of the larger that might be? Who is it right now around you? Yes.
This isn't exactly answering your question, but this thought came to my mind is, my parents took me, my brothers were born after me, us to church, Bible school, Sunday school. Often they didn't go themselves. As I got older, I went by myself. I could walk there. And I remember hearing this mustard seed parable often in all those grade school, elementary grade school years. And I liked it without really understanding it as I do as an adult of, trusting that good things are going to be coming out of a difficult, well, the mustard seed is not about a difficult time turning better. It's more about, I think, planting something, whether it be, for me, I went to a 3-year nursing school where we lived in the nurses' residence. Our education, staffing the hospital, saved the hospital tons of money not hiring nurses. So then, and I didn't have a college education or degree or anything from that. So then I put myself through my baccalaureate program in my 20s later. I put myself through the master's program, finishing when I was 50. Those were all burying little seeds.
Yes.
And especially my master's program, sometimes having trouble feeding myself due to expenses and paying a mortgage and trying to work. And yet trusting that it was going to grow fruit.
Sure. Well,
And my parents, what the bottom line of that was, my parents were troubled people. They did the best they could. A line we hear so often. But boy, what they gave me in introducing me to a faith. And I have said to people with small children, it doesn't matter what faith you bring your child up in. Introduce them to some kind of faith, because it will serve them in ways we can't see
That's right.
later in life.
And the hard part about that, Melanie, is that sometimes parents are reluctant to do that because of, however, a negative experience they had. Well, I don't want to do the same thing that was given to me wrongly, where it was only this small of a thing. But by not giving any faith, you're right that we leave kids in a worse spot than that. But it's hard to figure out just how to show that larger picture. So let me ask you a question, because to all of you, who was it that told you some of that bigger picture, and who was it that stood in the way of that? Who said something like, you can never do that because you're whatever it is they think you are? But who's told you something bigger?
I think it was one of my high school math teachers. I had him in 10th grade and 12th grade
Yeah.
in a time in the 60s when girls studying advanced math was a rarity.
Just didn't
And-
happen, did it?
No, it didn't. But in my high school, there were 16 girls in our pre-calculus class out of a whole mess of boys. And he treated us with just as much respect and value as he did the boys. And I hadn't experienced that up until that point, and I did not experience that in college.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he was a good man.
Good. I'm glad you had that voice in your life. Who else had somebody who told them bigger than what they'd been told by others?
I can't think of a specific person. I grew up in a family where it was a very conservative evangelical fundamentalist thing, and there was just a lot of no, we don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't go to movies, we don't dance, we don't, and so I went to a public school and I couldn't participate in certain things, and so I was kind of this little pariah.
Yeah.
I didn't know where, I didn't really feel like I fit there. My closest friends were my Sunday school friend. I lived for my weekends because those were the people that were like me. But there were several teachers, especially in high school. I can't pinpoint a specific one, but there were several who just challenged my thinking and encouraged me, and sort of let me know that they thought I could go farther than what the confines that I had found myself in growing up, in my home.
I'm amazed how often, Margie, we as religious people define ourselves by the nots.
Yeah.
We're not that, we don't do that, all of those kinds of things. And when I listen to what Jesus tended to say, it always seemed more like dreams of what could be, possibilities to look towards, kingdom of God visions, rather than a small vision of don't do this and don't do that. And yet we fall back on the don't do's, don't acts, don't be all the time, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say, I want to qualify that. I don't want to damn my parents.
No, I don't mean that. I think that's built into systems.
Yeah.
Right?
It was a stable and loving home, but there was just a lot of conditional love as well.
I don't think that's untypical of what we do. Because it's all part of that is because it's always easier, I think, with kids to draw boundaries first. Don't do this, do that, and forget that that's only the beginning of the parenting work. You also have to somehow help kids to be able to move bigger than just and be able to draw their own larger boundaries, right? So when it comes to things like sex, because none of us wants our 13-year-old to have sex and get pregnant and all of the things like that. But if we say, for example, sex is bad, we're really telling them the wrong message about that, right? And they know it's the wrong message because they know as adults we like sex, right? So if we tell that, we're really limiting their perspective, and we're putting ourselves at odds against each other. And it's an easy message because it is not a good time at that time. But we have to do something that says it's a great thing, but how do we do it at the right, you know, and that type of larger message is harder for us to do. It takes more time.
I grew up in rural South Dakota, and as a kid, we started to attend a very small United Methodist Church, or Methodist church at the time, I guess, in a little town. The area was very homogeneous. There was almost no one who wasn't white or Christian. They might be Catholic as opposed to Protestant, but very homogeneous and very focused on local stuff. And I had a Sunday school teacher who introduced us to a broader world. It was a time of civil rights activities in the South, and we learned through her a lot of things that was going on with people who were a little bit different from us. But it gave me in particular a kind of appreciation and empathy or connection with people beyond that small group of people that I knew locally, which I think shaped a lot for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. When we in any way have some sense of chosen people and the only chosen people type of thing, the only good people, the only right, it really affects how we deal with each other. And the more we can open ourselves up to the largeness of the family of God, it helps, doesn't it? Because then when I step into this relationship with this person, no matter what he or she represents, it changes the way I deal with them. The hard part is that life often causes some of those small things become even smaller. And so if there's only one black man in my school, I tend to diminish all black men, right? And yet maybe that's the mustard seed I need to see, right? What can he teach me? How can he expand me? And that's true about whatever it is we're looking at. If there's a way that has been defined, like Margie said, more by the knots, then sometimes I don't see what possibilities are on the other side of those boundaries. Not just the negative possibilities that Mom's trying to warn us against, but also the other things that are there. There's a great story about a pastor from Scotland who became president of the World Council of Churches or something like that. And so was on a delegation going around the world, and they went to Greece. They went to an Orthodox church there and met with the priest, and the priest invited them in and said, "Oh, it's so good to have you here. Sit down with me and drink wine." As a good Scotsman, he didn't drink wine, right? As a church man, he didn't drink wine. But he sat down with that priest and sat and drank and enjoyed the time with him. And as they left, his companions looked at him and said, "Hey, how do you, a good churchman, why do you drink alcohol?" He said, "I don't drink alcohol, but somebody had to be a Christian there."
Yeah.
Right? And it's in the moment, are we willing to step outside of that smallness of the definition we have to be able to see the relationship in that moment? That's kind of what this is talking about. Do we see the larger possibilities? And being in that moment of fellowship with that Greek priest was important for him. The hospitality was being offered, the chance at seeing something better, more, was good. Which leads into our next parable. It's the parable of the leaven, of yeast, what it does. Now, the tough part is that we tend not to use yeast as much these days. Well, we do, we just don't see it. We don't hold the yeast, so we don't see what it is as much. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed it in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Yeast expands things, changes things, changes the very chemical makeup of those other elements so that something happens differently. But it means that we have to. I didn't show you that picture, did I? Sorry. Let me show you that picture. And I should tell you, as I show you this picture, that all of these pictures, these are windows from First Church Phoenix, where I served, and they have marvelous artwork in that church. These stained glass windows, and this is a set of, I think, 21 windows that are probably only about 2 feet by 2 feet. That's way up high in the building. So there's the 3 measures of flour, and all of it is leavened. We don't often know what the leavening is. I hate it in some ways that as a first grade teacher, I didn't get to see the end result. Sometimes that kid would move to another school district or another university or another state, I mean, and would go somewhere else, and I wouldn't get to see what it is that kid became. You just had to trust that what you were putting in there was leaven of some sort, and that it would grow and change and do. But the thing of it is that with leaven, it's not you that changes it, it's the leaven itself, and all you can do is add it to the mixture. So how many have tried to love someone and never got love in return? You don't get to always get a fair return on your investment, do you? You have to trust, though, that somewhere it's going to change things. Catherine, you raised your hand. Where is it that you tried to love and didn't quite work?
Well, I think mainly in when I was married, and that was just a real difficult. It was a difficult situation. It's somebody I met him. We were like high schoolers together, and so I met him pretty early on in my adolescence, and had some sort of a sense somehow that I would end up marrying him, and sure enough, I did when I was 20. And I always had a vision of him in a kind of way, because I could see that he was smart, and he came from a similar family background as mine. He was a Lutheran, I was a Methodist, but at least it wasn't Catholic. So, because that would have been not good from the families, probably both families' perspective. But I think that there were just definitely some differences between us. He saw things in a different light than I ever did, and fairly early on, unfortunately, in my marriage, I began to question whether I had possibly made a mistake. Nevertheless, I stayed with it for a long time. But I certainly had, some misgivings based on certain behaviors, attitudes, etc. And I'm not a blameless person. I think that maybe I didn't set boundaries very well in the marriage, and I think it's always based on our family of origin stuff and what you see and don't see in your own family. So I'll try to speed this up. I think I wanted to prove that I could be a better wife and mother and have a successful marriage. I didn't feel that my parents' marriage was particularly successful. I mean, they toughed it out, and And it was a contest of, I just, they lasted, 60 years, but which is a lot, but it wasn't, I don't think, a happy marriage either way, but they were kind of stoic about it. And so in the course of that, I just thought, well, maybe if I tried harder, maybe it was something I needed to work on, or what I needed to, quote unquote, do. And we attempted, marriage counseling. I went by myself. We saw our minister and talked with him, and, there were things along the way, but fundamentally, we were two different people. So.
The people in our class, people who are we might call them the failed relationships, right? The ones that didn't work out. We sometimes look at that and say, I wish that hadn't happened, but I don't think we would be who we are without that in place.
Hey, Jim, I think I missed a word. We call that did you say
our failed
relationship?
relationships, those failures of life. And it's not just the relationship.
Failed things.
Yeah. It's not just the love relationships, it's the business relationships that didn't come to fruition. It's whatever opportunities we thought we had and we weren't able to follow up on. That doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. It means that somehow down the road, we're going to see the benefits from them, not necessarily in the moment. When you come out of a relationship like that, at least one of the things you come out with is, how do I do it differently next time? How do I try to be in a space with the next person in a better way, a different way? And not just the next love relationship, with everyone else. In the midst of losing yourself in one marriage, you sometimes find the strength to not lose yourself in the rest of your relationships of life, if you use that as the leaven that grows you and changes you.
Jim?
Yes.
When I was 5, my mother was newly divorced, and we lived with our grandparents, my little baby sister and I. And I was an adventurer. I climbed a telephone pole and got thousands of pricklies in me. I took my little sister in her carriage downtown by myself to Grandpa's place, and I did all kinds of things. I was given second chances. And from there, not getting spanked, but just being told why my actions were bad, it really changed me. I thought, okay, I can do different choices. And I did. It was just a real learning situation, but second chances are so important.
Yeah, and the hard part about that, the difficulty, is whatever we say that, the kid can't be any more than this, that this is the most they can be. And that's a deadly thing for anybody to have to live under. Because we're all more than that, aren't we? Whatever that is. And your ex is also more than that, right? And so to put them into a space of they're only that, especially if you're sharing kids, you got to see that somehow you have leavened them so that they're becoming more also. And anybody that you have a disagreement with, and it may be even a legitimate disagreement, you have to figure out how to not hold them into just the spot of that disagreement, because they're always more than that, aren't they? How about in our world? Is there a way that right now we're seeing each other through very small lenses?
So Jim, I don't know if this is helpful in this perspective, but in the footnotes of the study Bible I'm using, they make the point that there's yeast was considered to be a contaminating and corrupting substance at that time. And what they draw from that is God's empire will contaminate cultural norms like Rome's empire, hierarchy, patriarchy, and injustice.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that lends to this conversation or not. But.
Well, yeah. And the thing of it is unleavened bread in ancient Israel was pretty typical. Why? Because it's simpler, right? That's why we still have a lot of unleavened bread that happens around the world. Pita bread, for example, right? And it's not bad bread, but there's something nice about the nice, fluffy, leavened bread that we use all the time. And it's not necessarily that it's better or worse, but it is different and it's changed. And you're right that sometimes we fight against those things. And that's a lot of what we're doing right today. Some people that are saying, I don't want that new thing. Other people that are saying that new thing is what will make it all better. Right? And somehow we have to be in that conversation around those things. Is it a corrupting element? Or is it that which will draw us towards what's best?
I think for me right now, the frustration that I'm having is where some states, some people just even in the same communities, I mean, it's this issue of let's get the economy moving again. Let's stay back to make sure we're really through this before we move that way. And we're just not on the same page at all. And it seems like the more I try to just filter as much of it out as I can because it frustrates me, but it's somehow I have to let go of how I think we're going to get through this and say, well, whatever I want it to be, it's just going to happen the way it happens. And I have to let go of that wanting to control it.
Yeah.
And be with what is.
Yeah. And think about those two words you just said, because these are important words in this whole progress. Let go.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to look at the next parable so you can see why that's important. So let me go to this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Part of what we have to figure out is what's the most important about all these things. So I think we do a whole lot of holding on to small pearls and old possessions instead of figuring out what's really most important right now. And we do a lot of arguing back and forth about those things, don't we? Those smaller things, and forget what is of most importance. The hard part is that very often your view of most important and your neighbor's view of most important may not match. So what do? You go back to Margie's two words. You let go. You let go of everything in order to hold on to that which is of most importance to you. Which means sometimes you choose not to fight that fight because this over here is more important than that. And it's tough, isn't it? I'm trying to figure out how to get Zoom into my mom's house as she deals with a computer that's missing all kinds of the elements that you need, like a camera and speakers. And I can't get into that room at all because she's on lockdown, right? And I keep asking myself, well, is it really important that I get Zoom into her house? And part of her says, no, I don't care. But I think we, the family, do care because we want to be able to see her. We want to be able to talk with her. It was just her birthday and Mother's Day is coming up, and trying to figure out what is of most importance and how to connect to that is hard, isn't it? And Zoom is probably not the pearl of great price, right? But it may lead to it, which I think is being in connection and in relationship with my mom. Not a necessary component, but how do I make sure that I hold on to the relationship more than the Zoom relationship? And not force her beyond her comfort just in order to get what I think would be better. What's most important? And what do you let go of? So in your life, where is it that you've had to let go of something to move towards something else? Or let go of someone. Sometimes it's someone that you let go of. And you also might want to think about it in this way. What was the treasure that you saw that was important enough to hold on to that treasure?
A few years ago, well, about 10 now, my sister, younger sister, was going through a separation and an eventual divorce with her husband. And she was a real basket case, as people often are in that situation. And it was at the same time that my dad was dying. And so there were a lot of emotions going around. And my sister tended to blame everyone outside of herself for what was going on and just be really, really angry all the time over, she'd scream over small things because she was hurting inside. And there was a part of me that just wanted to, write her out of my life because she was just so hurtful. But another part of me was remembering my mom telling me that family's important and you don't write off your family no matter what. And so I kind of stuck through it, and she's better now and we're better. But it was hard at times to hold on to that because, it wasn't fun.
Yeah. But the bottom line is you don't have to win every battle. It's what you're ultimately moving towards that you have to do, right? And if we're trying to win every battle, sometimes it is at the expense of the long term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I chose not to get mad at her when she was getting mad at me because it wouldn't have helped. Just like what you were saying, choosing what you fight over.
Yeah.
And I just had to choose not to if I wanted to keep a relationship.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I was thinking about what Margie was saying about our current situation and the big gap between different perspectives about what needs to happen. And I'm thinking about our tendency in this situation is to attack the people that are on the other side, to discredit what they're saying or what they want to do. And I think it's standing in the way of creativity and figuring out a good path forward.
Right.
At all levels. You take it all the way to the national and global level.
Yeah. I think there's a whole lot of where we try to get everyone to walk on the same path I'm walking on. And it means that I'm forcing them off of what's giving meaning to them. Even if my path is better, I may be losing them in the switch from there to here.
Isn't my path always better?
Well, I think so.
That's the problem, basically.
Yeah.
And we do a whole lot of yelling at each other about singular paths are the only ones to God. But the reality is let's say God is on top of this mountain and you're here and I'm here. It is not good for you to come all the way around the mountain and then climb up my path. You might as well start on your side of the mountain and climb up, even though it seems to be in an opposite direction as mine. But we do a whole lot of trying to make everyone come to the singular. which I don't think is helpful, or it's not as helpful as what we think it is. So what's your pearl of great price? What is the treasure hidden in the field that you've found? What are the things that are most important? Not that there's not a lot of other important things, but when it comes down to it, what is it that you hold on to as you let go of other things? One of the things that I think that St. Francis does well as a community, and I don't mean that we're always perfect at it as individuals. I think that relationship is one of the pearls of great price that St. Francis holds on to. So that in the midst of, and I don't just mean relationship within the community. In fact, in a very real way, it's the relationship outside of the community, trying to figure out how to not, even in the midst of very real differences between us, not destroy the relationships in the midst of that. We don't do that perfectly, but I think that's always a goal at St. Francis. It's always in our head, because we know that, because we emerge out of the rejection that people have felt, and we don't want to repeat that. And so we know that acceptance and love is more important sometimes than the cause, which causes challenges, because the cause is important, whatever the cause is. But the relationship is more our pearl of great price, isn't it? Here's the next parable, helps me to know how to deal with those kinds of things. Because how many have at least something you want to fix, something that you want, somebody that you need to have be different? Yeah, anybody have that in your life? All right, so let me show you the next thing that Jesus said. And when he said these parables, they came bam, bam, bam. Okay, they came very quickly. I just showed you the two of them, and now there's this one that he puts right along with it. And they have to come right together, because if you don't see them all at once, then you get mixed up. So here it is. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous. Now, God may agree with you perfectly that that thing needs to be changed. That person needs to be fixed. But guess what? It doesn't need to be done right now. You don't have to be the one who fixes that in this moment. Now, I like fixing people. I like having the right answer. I like knowing that if you just do this, but the reality is this gives me so much comfort to know that it's not up to me. That the kingdom of God, that vision that God has for the world, doesn't have to be dependent on my vision and what I think that should be. That somehow I have to trust beyond just myself. How is that hard for you? Why do you want to sort through the fish right now?
Sometimes it's because we see it as affecting our lives.
Yeah. There's no doubt about that. Or the lives of those who are dear to us. The reason why right now, I should be at General Conference right now. We were going to be arguing about does the church accept a broader vision of who is acceptable in the church, right? That affects our lives, and it's an important battle to fight, isn't it?
Don't you love it?
Right? But it's also, I
Well,
don't have to.
it's well deserved.
What? Say that again.
Are you gonna come visit me? Are you gonna-
Okay. I also don't have to, in the midst of trying to change the church into what I think it is, I don't have to change everybody's minds about it. I have people that I know are going to be on the opposite side of this, and I think they're absolutely wrong. But I don't have to fix them right now. And that kind of goes against my brain, because I think that they'd be so much better if they got fixed in just the way I think they ought to be fixed. But I don't have to solve that. So how do you draw the line between that? Because what I'm asking them to do to the church is unfixing things for them. So how do you not separate people from the kingdom? The silly story that's told is about somebody coming up to heaven, and St. Peter meets him at the gate, and they're taking a tour around heaven, and they get to this one part, and he says, shh, kind of be quiet right here. This is the so-and-so, and they think they're the only ones up here. Right? And to think that even in heaven, some people may still believe that they're the only ones there because that's what makes heaven for them. And to have a God big enough to allow that to be true is not a bad thing, right? I don't know how that would work, right? But to have that idea of that there's multiple ways of being able to experience the grandness of this kingdom of heaven is not necessarily bad. But it means that I have to not look at the fishnet and see what I think doesn't belong and do something about it right now. Because in that fishnet, who knows, there's a tin can and it surely seems like it shouldn't be there. But do I have to fix it today?
Yeah, I think we see a lot of that kind of feeling regarding economic issues, like so-and-so doesn't deserve a tax break, or, you know, or so-and-so ought to work harder, or so-and-so shouldn't get paid $4 million a year because he's had advantages in life. You know, we tend to like want to separate people and say, you shouldn't be getting that, whatever that is.
Yeah.
It's
You know, the basic problem with that, Doris, is why we do that. It's because we believe in something that is not kingdom of God thinking.
Yeah.
Kingdom of heaven always has abundance. And we live in limited resources or even scarcity moments. And so we think, well, only some of us can, only certain things do. And for God, it's much broader, much bigger. There's not narrow gates the way we define it. Like in the vision in the book of Revelation, where it shows the city of God. These gates are huge, enormous, and they're always open. But people sometimes look and say, see, God's kingdom has gates there and they're shut up against. But that's not the vision that John is trying to reveal. It's a vision of abundance, that everyone can be there. And yet we tell the other story. The other part from Revelation that gets told is the 144,000, right? And people have used that to say, look how few people God saves. And yet 144,000, 12,000 out of every tribe was saying that it was an enormous number, because they were living in cities of maybe a few dozen people. 100 people was large, 1,000 in Jerusalem. And they were saying 12,000 people from every tribe. He was using enormous numbers to say how abundant God's love, God's God's gift was. And we reverse it so very often. And so if we can think abundantly, it helps a lot.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, just tying in with what Dora said. There's so much thinking of that's focused on, if one person or 1% has so much, then there's not enough for everybody else. When really there should be enough for everyone. But how do you get out of that trap of, I have enough?
But that word enough is a good spiritual practice. We don't rest in enough. Right? We in a very real way, when someone asks how much is enough, our answer is always, well, one more. Just a bit more. And the reality is that we all need to get into that space of enough and help each other to be in that space of enough. Because in that place, we will figure out that there's truly abundance. Right? The feeding of the 5,000 was probably a story of saying, there's plenty of food here if you take it out of your cloaks and share it with each other. Right? But if everyone hides their food, then there's a scarcity. And why are we hiding it? Because I'm looking across the net and I'm seeing some people who I think don't deserve it. Or I don't want to give it to them.
Or I want to make sure there's enough for me, and maybe that's what this hoarding is all about,
And again, going back to fear. What if I don't have enough? What if I can't? So let me show you the very last parable for the day. It's right at the end of Matthew chapter 13. And it says this: have you understood all this? And they answered yes. I just think it's funny that they just put that in there. Because, of course, anytime Jesus says, have you understood it all? We all say, yes, of course. Which, of course, is never quite true, is it? Because tomorrow we're going to have to figure out how to sort through our nets. We're going to have to sort through what's the pearl of great price. We're going to have to see how the mustard seed will grow. And it will be a challenge all the way. And Jesus said to them, therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household, who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. Jesus is not saying with all of these things that everything we've done is wrong. But we also can't hold on to everything we've done is always just right. We have to continually let ourselves be challenged by these things. That means the answer that you had yesterday about what is the right course of action may not work tomorrow. But you have to be looking and holding on to the best of this from the past and find the best of this in the future. Not just run wholesale into this or stay stuck over here, but continually moving into where is God present right now. I don't know about you, but I don't do that well. Because I like some of my answers, and I repeat some of those answers until everyone's tired of them. Sometimes because they're right, but other times because they're easier than figuring out what's the new answer that should be voiced right now. And when we're falling back on old things only, we miss it. But everything new is not the right answer either. Which way do you fail? Holding on to old or running to new? Not that you only fail that way, but which way is your tendency?
Holding on.
Okay. How about the rest of you? Holding on or running towards?
I think running toward the new.
Uh-huh.
So we have a very compatible family.
Yeah, it helps. You know, hopefully you can listen to her enough and she can listen to you enough that somehow it comes together somewhere in the right place. The rest of you holding on or running towards? I'm probably like Scott. I tend to be a running towards.
I was just going to say it's hard for me to answer that because I find myself wanting to run towards, but then when things don't work, when I get uncomfortable, I pull back to the old. So it's kind of a dance.
It helps if you realize that in a very real way, Jesus is saying evil is in both places and grace is in both places, right? Wrong answers are both places and right answers are both places. And that you have to continually be looking both ways to be able to find out what is the current space. And what's really tough about that is it sometimes means that something that you held on to yesterday, you have to let go of today. And something that you didn't run towards yesterday, tomorrow you're going to need to run towards it. That it's a living, dynamic relationship right now, not just with the people around us, but with life itself. That we can't just stand on what we have already done, but we have to live in the relational space of right now and figure out where it is that we need to sit down and drink a cup of wine with a priest, even though we don't drink wine. That's the kingdom of heaven. How many think it sounds perfectly easy?
In theory.
In theory. The good news is that while it's challenging, it will change the world the more we can live it. It'll change us and it'll change everything around us if we can live it and help others to live it. So go and be good kingdom people, right?
Amen.
Even if you don't like that word,
Yeah.
right?
Thank you.
Catherine,